We haven't got Jerry Hayes here today, and that's very sad, but a family took precedence over us, I'm afraid, but that was necessary. What we do have is the former president of ABF and a commercial beekeeper in his own right, Mr. Tim Tucker.
Good morning. I always feel like I'm coming home to Texas whenever I come down here for your meetings because I see so many old friends and new friends that I've just come to know in the last year or two, and we have so many of your young ladies come to our annual convention every year for our ABF Honey Queen program, and it's wonderful to meet and see all of them and see how they grow and mature over the course of a year, and see them kind of grow up in their travels, and it's a wonderful program that Texas supports very well. So I want to say thank you for that and doing that and inviting me here. I appreciate the opportunity to come here and share a few things with you. I'm not as knowledgeable as Pierre. Pierre knows pollen now. I mean, that guy's he's sharp. And it's amazing how these young kids today are helping us so much in our beekeeping, and supporting these scholarship programs is just absolutely critical. So I applaud you for that again. And when Lance asked me to do a talk to fill in for Jerry, which we're excited, I came here to see Jerry and hear his talk on successful beekeeping because I'm still learning as to what that actually is, and every year it seems to change, so I always enjoy hearing him and miss him. And Lance asked me to do just a little bit of a synopsis on what we do in the course of our year of commercial beekeeping, and it used to be sideline beekeeping, and then it used to be hobbyist beekeeping with just a couple of hives, and I started in 1990 with 2 hives of bees that a beekeeper gave me because we were removing bees from buildings in my exterminating business. So I killed lots of bees in the 80s and 90s in my 18 years of being in the exterminating business, and now they're getting back at me, I guess. I don't know. So anyways, he had 2 hives of bees in his front yard one day when I went to pick him up in 1990 in the summer. And I asked him what was up with the bees, and he said, well, you know, that job we did 2 weeks ago and the job we did 4 weeks ago, I put a bunch of colonies together, and there's 4 or 5 maybe queens in there, but one will survive. And he says, you're going to take them to your farm in southern Kansas and learn how to keep bees. And I said, no, Jimmy, I'm not going to do that. You guys are nuts. To do this for what you do, the small amount of reward that you get, you're absolutely crazy. So anyways, beekeepers are persistent, right, if nothing else. I mean, we just keep going and going, and Jimmy kept going and telling me I was going to take these bees down, and so I finally said, okay, I'll do it, just to shut him up. And the first year that I kept those 2 colonies of bees, they made 160 pounds of honey, and I just loved watching them. And over the course of the next year, I lost my fear of getting into them with his help, and I became a beekeeper. So that's how it all started about 17 or 18 years ago, and I'll have to say that I never, ever realized that I would come to the level of beekeeping that I did in the 90s and early 2000s when we were running about 800 hives of bees. I never envisioned that I would become a commercial beekeeper. It was the last thing on my list. It's like being a plumber. I wasn't ever going to go there either, but I really didn't imagine in my wildest dreams turning 2 hives into 800 hives. But in the 90s, it was very easy. We could double our operation almost every year. You could go from 2 to 4 to 6 to 16 to 25 to 42 as fast as you could build equipment because our bees were healthy. And they were far more vigorous than they are today. It was so much easier than you people are having to live with. If you've just began beekeeping in the last 8 or 10 years, you've probably not even seen healthy bees. So I'm thankful in so many ways that I was able to experience what it was like to have and live with healthy bees. And In southern Kansas, things are changing too. And this was a picture I took probably 20 years ago because it was snowy. And we did have a good 8 or 10-inch snow that year that stayed a couple of weeks, and we haven't had that since. So even our climate's changing, and our environment is changing for our bees. Since about 2000, and I'll have to blame this all on Clint Walker. It's all his fault, okay? We had at that time I was the president of the Kansas Honey Producers, and Clint was president of the ABF. And he sat me down after the meeting, and he said, him and Pat Highcomb both, who was past president, said, you need to become involved in the ABF. And I said, well, okay, I'll sign up. Give me the form. And so they twisted my arm, and I became involved. And before I knew it, Clint had me on the board and doing this and doing that, and membership committee. And then it turned into going to Korea and being invited to China as president. I mean, it's just amazing how things can happen when where we're supposed to be. You know, how things just kind of line up for us. So it's been a wonderful trip. Every year, we usually have our conference about the first half of the month in January. And the reason we do that is so that all the commercial beekeepers can go home, get their bees, and get to California for the 1st of February. So it's a tight, packed schedule. We've always had people asking us, why do you have it in January? Well, there's just so few months we can find where beekeepers aren't busy, because we are going 11 to 12 months to 13 months out of the year, where it's just so busy. But anyways, we'd like to invite you, if you don't have plans, to come to the Grand Sierra Resort in Reno, January 8th to 10th. You can register on abfnet.org if you'd like to, and see or learn any particulars about the conference coming up. The speakers' agenda, I think, will be on the site this week, and we have over 60 speakers, it's just phenomenal, the amount of programs that are going on. Some slots have 6 to 8 speakers at one time, so you can really pick and choose, and you'll never go anywhere in the U.S. and find more knowledge and information than at an ABF convention. So, again, we hope to invite you there. And this is a good friend of mine, George Hansen, who runs about 20,000 colonies of bees in Oregon. His bees now are all in refrigerated units, potato units, surviving the winter. So they'll be there until the end of January when he moves them to almonds. And I can't remember this little gal's name on the left there, but she's from Texas. Does anybody recognize her? Caroline. Adams, yes, Caroline Adams. So we've had a lot of young ladies represent your state and our organization to the country. And this is just a tremendous, tremendous program of marketing. They get hundreds of thousands of dollars of free advertising for you, each and every one of us. They're promoting the image of honey every day at fairs and shows and in radio interviews. So support your Honey Queen program. It's one of the best tools that we have. And, of course, this is a couple of people you might know, Pat Highcomb on the right and Benford Weaver, and a good friend of mine named Eric Youngs from Nebraska. This was clear back in the first joint conference that we ever had at the ABF, and that was in 2008 in Sacramento. So, anyways, Benford's now gone. Pat's a great guy, one of the fellows that got me involved. So, down to what we do throughout the course of the year. When we get back from the conference, it's always catch-up time, because we've been gone for a couple of weeks. For me, it's not just a 4-day thing. It's usually a whole week out there, and I always drive, so it's 2 days of travel. Lots of times, unless we're down here in Texas, like we were last year in Houston. And we run home, and we're building boxes all winter long, usually to replace our old boxes. But most of these ones we've been building the last few years, and an idea I want to share with you. I'm dyslexic when I talk sometimes. We use 6-frame boxes for our nuke boxes that we have made in Texas, and I'll show you why here in a little bit. But we make all of our own nuke boxes. We make them for about $8 a piece because we build them out of T111, and we can get about 5.5 boxes out of a sheet. Depending on the price of your T111, it's usually around $30, $35. So we are building and building frames all winter long. Usually we build about 3,000 to 5,000 frames in a good year when we're selling 300 to 400 nukes. So we need a good 4 new frames to go into every nuke. So we're doing that too. But the thing I wanted to point out here is whenever you're using a table saw, and beekeepers are good carpenters, aren't we? We have to learn to be good carpenters, as well as a lot of biologists and virologists and all kinds of other things that we pick up in our experience. Always use 2 people when you're using a table saw. So one can push and one can pull through your table saw, so that sheet doesn't come back at you. But we zip our sheets up into 3 or 4. Well, it's actually 5 strips. I think we get 5 10.5-inch strips, and then we cut those up for our sides and our fronts. And you can see here how easy they are to put together. We actually miter an edge, and then we are sizing them up to make sure that our 3 frames fit on each side of a divider that goes into that box, a masonite divider, which allows this box to have actually 2 nucleus hives in it, or mating hives that we're going to have when we're down here in Texas. Because we make our splits, we're really busy working to get ready for March 23rd or 25th when we come down here and make splits over in Henderson and over east of Tyler, Kilgore. And we have an entrance in the front and an entrance out of the back, and you can see how perfectly those fit on the mitered edge, and that masonite slip piece there is just a sizer. We actually put one that'll go all the way through the box and divide those units into 2. And we always try to make sure we glue everything. I don't know how much equipment. We quit taking frames when we're exchanging our frames of bees and brood in our nuke boxes for other people's frames because 80% of them came in unglued. And they were wobbly, and they fell apart, and they were just unusable. So we quit doing that. People forget to glue everything they do. Nails are just to what? Hold it till the glue dries. That's right. So don't forget to do that application and always square up. You can see the excess Elmers up there in the corner, and make sure all your boxes are square and true. And of course, that's the divider slot that goes down through the middle. So once we get everything built, we can put these nuke boxes right together, one after the other, down a row. Sometimes we've had 40 or 50 in a row, and we try to paint them a little bit different. I don't know if you can see, but we don't put a red box next to a red box. Sometimes we'll put a blue box next to a blue box, like this one that's right there. There's 2 blue boxes, and I think there's a couple blue boxes up here that are together, and maybe a couple back on that second row. There's might be 3, but as you can see, we've painted the fronts of them a little different. We put designs and X's so that the queens will know if they're being mated. And generally, we don't mate in this kind of a situation, but the bees will know and identify the markings on their hive when they're returning. So what we're looking for in Kansas, of course, is the beginning of our season. Anywhere you are, whether it's in Indiana or Wisconsin or Illinois, Florida, well, maybe not Florida, but North Carolina, are those dandelions to start blooming. And that really, really starts our whole season, because our season is the season of the bees. We have to follow the bees and react to them every week that we're inspecting our colonies and grow, and allowing them to grow and grow as quickly as possible. And the thing about bees is they're all just like every one of you as I'm looking out in the audience. They're all different. Each and every colony is different, just like we are. So a lot of times it's not good to treat them all the same. they have different requirements. They grow differently, and sometimes they need space quicker. So you have to kind of react to each and every colony as it goes through the season. And I think, everywhere I go, wherever I speak to beekeepers, in Canada or here in Florida or the Caribbean, beekeeping is all local. And that's why you're here today. That's why you go have your local club, is that so you can share ideas with the people that you're working with who know how to respond to these situations and the environment, the bloom period, the growth period, the brood period in Texas. North Texas is different from South Texas, isn't it? So beekeeping is all very local, and it's all very individual too. It's very difficult to treat bees all the same. And we also look for the blooming of the Bradford pears, and Bradford pears are considered a pest species anymore in our area, but they provide tons of pollen. Like Pierre was talking about, we're finding out more and more how important pollen is to the bee's diet, and maybe even to ours. Pollen is richer in protein than beef. And so, it's amazing to think that the bees survive only on pollen and honey. When we think about our diet, yes, we survive on proteins and carbohydrates and minerals and vitamins and all those things, but most of those minerals, a lot of those minerals and vitamins are found in the pollen. And like he was talking about earlier, sometimes a pollen-rich or a protein-rich pollen will totally be ignored by the bees, and they'll work something else. So we're always making new discoveries on how important pollen is, as opposed to, we always think as beekeepers it's honey, 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 and it's not. And we're actually switching a lot of our operation in Kansas. About 50% of our production now is pollen, because we are in a nectar-poor, pollen-rich environment. So that's something else you might want to be thinking about, because pollen sales, when, he said on this one slide there, it indicated that they need about 26 to 30 pounds of pollen a year to survive, and we all know they need, about 300 pounds of honey just to survive, just to maintain the hive throughout the course of the year. So if you can collect or extract pollen from the bees, we sell pollen at about $16 to $20 a pound, so it's worth a lot more than honey. And because a lot of our honey anymore is wholesale, so at about $3.50 a pound to $4. So it's a very wise decision when it comes to economics to really consider producing as much pollen, especially if you're selling at your local farmers markets. Yes?
Are you drying the pollen?
Yes. Mm-hmm. Yes, and there's a lot of people, pollen is something we could talk about for a week. And when Lance asked me to compress a year into 50 minutes, which I'm going to try to do, and it's almost impossible to talk about all the different aspects of what you should do or what you shouldn't do when it comes to pollen. There's a lot of pure pollen believers that feel that pollen should not be dried. But for practical purposes and for storage, it's really the only way I can get it done. I mean, I can't take raw pollen and fill capsules, and freeze it. It just doesn't work in my operation. So I have to do what's next, which I can do, and which is the next best thing. So yes, we dry it very slowly in an oven on cookie sheets, just very, it's all non-high tech, and it's very easy. You just don't want to do it too long. You want to make sure that when you pull it with a spoon, that it doesn't stick together anymore. You're just trying to get it so it won't adhere, the pollen grains won't adhere. And then we freeze it. So we will this year hopefully produce about 2,000 pounds of pollen, I'm sorry. And I hope that in the next 10 years, if I'm still here, God willing, we could get that up to 4,000 or 5,000 pounds, because that's what our market potential is in our area. So when you're talking about if you're doing your farmers markets or your local health food store, if you're supplying them with your pollen and your honey, here in Temple, Waco, Dallas, Houston, Austin, all of the market potential is phenomenal. It really is when you start thinking about the economics of what you can do if you plan and if you work through the system that you have to do that legally. And we'll talk about that in another talk that I'm doing tomorrow. Feeding bees, we always start out when we get home putting a little feed on the ones that are light. This is a mass feeding that we did in California in 2008 when we were taking bees to California. I don't do that anymore because we feel, well, I'll tell you the truth. Our last year in the almonds was not a good experience. We got nuked out. And what I mean by that is someone drove a truck into our holding yard, and there were 3 other beekeepers in the area too, and they hit us for about 200 hives by just taking the center 5 frames out of our hives and putting them in their nuke boxes. So probably 80% of them, they had the queen. Because if you're grabbing, the middle frames and you're looking for eggs, where's your queen going to be? She's not going to be out on the end on frames of honey. She's going to be in the center where those eggs are, and they got 80 to 90% of the queens out of that, and even the ones that had queens weren't worth anything when they came home. So overall, we were lucky to pay our trucking bill that year because trucking was high, and I felt that if we could make a nuke and a half, or 2 nukes out of a standard unit and sell them at $125 to $145 a piece, we were way ahead of going to California. We were way ahead of stressing the bees because while they do come back sometimes advanced and you can make a few more splits out of them, you have the investment of feeding them out there and taking care of, make sure they're not stolen. Randy had I think it was 800 hives stolen out there this year. So it's just not a great experience. It's not all it's cracked up to be, and we just decided it didn't fit our operation. Clint's always talking about doing things that fit your operation as well as you can get married to them. You have to work things into your operation. Some things work and some things don't. And for some beekeepers, it's the big paycheck. So they do it every year and they plan for it. Our thing to do is to avoid this, which is to build the bees up, to a good, healthy state so that we can split them around the 3rd week of March here in Texas and avoid those sealed queen cells, swarm cells. Because once it gets to this stage, it's very hard to stop the bees from swarming, right? They're going to go, more than likely. Even if you do Demery or you do a standard, take her out. The only way we've ever found a good way to do it is to take her out with another frame of brood, 2 frames, and make a split with her. And then put a cell in the remaining colony. That will usually keep them home. And Demerying sometimes, we just didn't get to this colony, and it's a great queen. I mean, you can see that, she's doing a pretty good job of producing brood there. So April is spent trying to avoid that picture that we just looked at, managing the bees to produce lots of brood that we can steal and make splits with and not have the bees swarm, especially with those good queens. This is an older frame of brood. Again, these are frames that we're looking for. We're looking for the queen on these, but you can also see that this colony, when we're looking to split bees, we look for coverage, and I don't know if I have a good slide here in this, but we look for good coverage of bees. When we have a box open, don't your bees come to the top usually on the frames, the remaining frames that are in the boxes? Or they're at least close looking at you, trying to see what's going on. We probably would not consider splitting this hive, even though maybe it had a good frame of brood here and a good frame of brood here, and the top box didn't have any. This is not one that we would want to probably split because there's not a great coverage of bees on the frame, and there's not a good coverage of bees on the top of the box. Of course, we're always looking for fat queens. I don't know if you can see the one on the top here, this black Russian queen was a third-year queen, and she's getting pretty thin, so we're looking at the size of the abdomen generally is a good indicator on a queen we want to run another season or kill. I mean, these are the types of queens when we're making splits, and this pointer doesn't work all the time, we would probably just squash and replace with a cell. So this is what we're looking for. This is actually probably a Wooten's Golden Queen or in that line. We like to put gold genetics into our darker bees and end up with something that's kind of in between these that we call banded queens. They have dark stripes but good gold markings still because they have good nature. And when we're selling bees to beekeepers, new beekeepers, we don't want them to be hot. We want them to be as gentle as they can so the experience that they have is as good as possible the first year. Of course, we're always dealing with mites. You know, we're always trying to inspect and see the signs of mite damage, you know, PMS or that spotty brood and a weakening of the hive. And those hives that don't come up, we know we have to treat aggressively for mites. We are not seeing the number of mites we used to see 20 years ago in the 1990s when our bees were so healthy. You know, that's the really ironic thing about this situation. In the 90s, we had not only varroa mite, we had what? Tracheal mite. And if you didn't treat your hives with menthol for tracheal mite, they died. Who treats for tracheal mites today? Okay, so that problem is gone. It's been removed from the issue. The other thing we're not seeing for some reason, and I don't know if it's general practices in the beekeeping industry or we've just gotten smarter, but we don't see the amount of American foul brood issues either. What we're seeing is European foul brood, which is much more easily contained and doesn't require burning your equipment and starting over. So we're seeing in our mite rolls usually maybe nothing, sometimes maybe 3 or 4 mites, when in the 90s we would see, and you can ask Clint if this is the truth, when you did a 300 bee mite roll, you would literally find maybe 18 to 30 mites. Some were more than that. You'd quit counting. And we do not see the number of mites, but the problem is the viruses that they vector seem to be more lethal to the bees. So there's something going on there, but it's still a very, very important issue that you need to be monitoring all the time, and we are monitoring it. To get on real quickly here, this is at a yard, a friend of mine's yard, Dan Whitney. This is Dan here, and we buy a lot of cells from him. I don't know if anybody knows him or admits to knowing him, but he's quite a character, and we buy a lot of cells from him. And this is a oop, went too far here. This is him actually in his grafting house, and it's so nice to be able to go into a facility and have the light you need to do this as opposed to doing it outside the way we try to do it. But everybody should learn how to do a little bit of queen grafting. If you have more than 6 to 10, 15 hives, you know, experiment with it. It's a great learning experience, and when he does it professionally, I mean, he's selling 10, 15,000 cells a year and a lot of mated queens as well. He's fast. So it's good to get with somebody who can show you how to graft quickly, because that's one of the keys to success. Getting your success rate from 40% or 60% up to 80 or 90 or 95 is the speed with which you can do it and the accuracy. So he's a great resource for, you know, I'm sure if you wanted to go down, they're at Jasper, south of Jasper, around 15 miles, and if you wanted to learn how to graft on a day or two, I'm sure Dan would be delighted to have you come in if you bought him lunch. Anyways, here we are looking for, that's me on the right, we're looking for the queen in this box, because we actually found eggs in that. But our whole thing in March and April and May is queens, 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 queens. And as someone told me a while back, I take very little credit for what I talk about, because I've gleaned it from situations like you're in today, listening to people who are very educated about what they're talking about. And a fella at one of our ABF conventions years ago said the number one thing when it comes to success, whether you'll be successful as a beekeeper or not, is number one, queens, and your ability to either raise them or buy them and maintain them. And the second thing is queens. And the third thing is queens. And that is so true. And you have got to get to that honey production season, and yours probably starts down here about, what, the 1st of May, the 10th of May? March? It starts as early, well, actually where you're collecting? Okay. Well, yeah, your varietals and stuff, you're early. Yeah, wahia doesn't bloom early. What's the holly? Is it holly? Yopon, yes, right. But anyways, to have those queens up and at their maximum production, Dewey will talk about, or has talked about on several occasions, the cycle of the bees and how you've got to get that maximum number of field force to the point where your honey production starts. And if you don't have those two interacting, if your field force is 2 months behind your honey flow, you're going to be in that 20-pound to 40-pound range at best. To do that 60 to 100 or 120 pounds of honey, your bees have to be at optimum when your honey flow starts. And to do that, you have to have good queens, always good queens. This is one of our little yards when we get them back to Kansas, and they've been mated, and we're putting them out on clover, usually white clover that starts. And this is when our fruit trees are all blooming, lots of dandelions. Everything is really abundant in Kansas instead of in March, usually the 15th of April to the 15th of May. So as you can see here, go back. See this colony? How many boxes does that have on it? 3. And then we have one that has 1. We have one that has 2. 1, 1, 1, 1, 1, 2. And these are all they're all different. These boxes, or these colonies here, were more populous, more crowded than the ones that were in 1. And when we come back from Kansas, we pull those dividers and separate them out. So these are all just individual colonies now once they've been mated. So they've been split up so that they can grow into a full 6-frame nuke so that we can sell those as 5-framers, so we know we always have really good 5-frame colonies. Those jars on top, we put 2 holes in the top of these colonies, and this is the entrance for the front, and then there's an entrance around here for the back. But these 2 quart jars will feed the colony for about 10 days to 2 weeks in our area. Sometimes they will really take them down in 3 to 4 or 5 days, but it'll get them through twice that period of time. So we don't have to feed every 3 to 5 days. And lots of times in this situation, this was probably a dink hive we were still having to feed. And this one was not, and this was another dink hive. If we go back to you see these up front? There's no feeder jars on them. So again, we're treating each of those hives separately. The 4 there with feeder jars still need the help. They're still kind of being nursed along. When we get ready to come back from Texas with our mated queens, this is how we strap them on. We have 2 trailers, usually we fill each of them, and we can put about 200 hives. And if we stack them up 3 high, we can get about 240 or 60 on a trailer. And this is one of our mating yards around Kilgore, and you can see how close we set them. It doesn't take much, separation between the colonies to make sure that those queens always come back to the right box. And sometimes it's not a bad idea. We've learned in the last few years. What's the one negative thing about this picture? They're all spaced and shaped the same direction. Yes. That's right. And, I'm not an expert at this. I'm still learning. So anyways, this was about 6-7 years ago, and we learned that we get a little bit better queen mating percentage if we will flip these boxes around, so they're not all facing the same direction. And, yeah, very good. You know more than I do sometimes. This is just a picture to show you the hive entrance, and when we built these so that we can slide this screen in here and close off the entrance. We can just walk up to the colony, close it up at 8 o'clock in the evening, throw them on the trailer, and head back to Kansas. So we don't have to worry about, putting closures in each one or steel wool or tape or whatever you have to do. We just make sure that those screens always slide in a track. That we built this actual frame around here, and it has a recess in it so that screen slides perfectly along in front and closes off the colony in the front and the back. Okay, where's the queen? Yeah, it's right up here. It's very hard sometimes for newbies or sometimes even us older beekeepers to find virgin queens, but you have to learn to practice and train your eye to look, and the best time to do that is when your queens are small, right? Because then when they get big, when they're fully mated and expanded, their abdomen's expanded, they're easier to see. So the other thing that you'll notice here is that she is a light golden queen, and we try to make sure that our queens that we're selling in nukes are not black. Some people love Russian bees. I don't like Russian bees because they build up slow and they're black. And they're hard to find, on the frames, especially if your frames are more than a couple of years old. So, again, learn to experiment with your queens, raise a few, and train your eye to find these virgin queens, that are running around and have no queen retinue either, lots of times. They won't have any bees following them to attend them. And sometimes that's a real key issue in finding queens, is that number of bees that encircle them. When we start delivering our nukes, which is going to be late for you guys down here, but in Kansas, our honey flow, our really good honey flow doesn't start until around the 15th of May with our clovers, our tall clovers. And all the wildflowers that bloom from May to around the middle of July. We have a good 2-month spring nectar flow. When we deliver our bees, sometimes we'll drive them 100 miles west to Wichita, and take 2 hours. We let them set for 15 to 30 minutes, and we start transferring them into our beekeepers' boxes, our customers' boxes. And this is the way we do it. I have never, ever put anything on, and some people would say that, well, that's stupid. But what we want to demonstrate is that our bees are gentle to our customers, and that they are easy to work with, that they can be worked. Now, we wouldn't do this on a rainy day or a day it was 40 degrees out. But, we want to demonstrate, and the other thing we want to show bees, new bees especially, new beekeepers, are the queen. We always find the queen, and if we can't find a queen in a box, we don't give it to them. Because when they leave there, we want them to know that they've got a good 4 to 5 frames of brood and a queen that's in that box alive, so that they can't get home and say, there's no queen in that box. So every colony we sell, we locate the queen. And this young lady had been keeping bees for 3 or 4 years, and I think she bought a dozen from us, and this is exactly how we installed them in her boxes. And she stood there, and that's what we want to see, this coverage of bees on the top. So if you're out buying nukes from somebody and they put them in your box and there's no good bee coverage on those 5 frames and they're charging you $200, you may not be getting the best deal in the country. So what we want to do is demonstrate that we have a queen and we have a good 5 frames of brood, and they are packed. They are jammed. This was actually she had 8 frame equipment, and I told her when she got home, she better put her second box on. Right then. Because in a week, maybe even in 2 or 3 days, they were going to have this frame here drawn out and that frame drawn out, and there'd be no room. Because this hive was going to take off. And that's what we want to see in all of our hives. Our operation is changing dramatically over the years. When we started producing honey and selling it, we wanted to produce all of our own honey and make sure our customers knew it was coming from Tucker bees. I can no longer do that. We're in about 48 stores, and just like Clint, we have to buy honey, so we try to buy honey locally from beekeepers that don't want to pack honey and don't want to distribute honey, because it is a process, and it's a very low profit process. And you need to find those aspects of your business that are the higher profit lines. So when we're buying honey, and the other thing we're at odds with when having to buy 2 loads of honey a year to meet our needs, is that we're subject to the increasing honey prices. So, we try to keep our prices competitive with the larger producers and consistent. We can't raise them and lower prices every year when honey prices jump 40, 50 cents like they have in the last few months. So honey production is no longer our number one push or goal to produce honey, because we can buy it from people who can produce 100 to 200 pounds per hive better than I can. Because I'm the first person to agree, especially in the last 4 or 5 years when I've had to been traveling so much, I'm not the best beekeeper. So we have to find what we do well. If we're good at marketing our honey, if we're good at marketing specialty products and enjoy making those things, that's what we have to spend our time on. So it's becoming less and less important. But of course, honey production is still always a good base part of our business. And we even still do a Saturday morning farmers market, because I just love it. They're my family. They're my Saturday morning family, that I go out and see every week. And if I'm not there, they're on Facebook. Where were you? Because we do a whole variety of things here that we started back in the early 2000s. We do jams and jellies as well as creamed honey, which we're going to talk about tomorrow morning, and flavored creamed honeys, which, you can see a couple of jars here of our creamed honey in the middle. These are jams and jellies. We also sell sorghum that we buy from the Amish up at Rich Hill, Missouri. And we also make honey and regular lemonade. I don't know if you can see it all up there at the end. But, it takes, if you just go to a farmer's market and you have pint jars out there, you're selling pint jars of honey, and you have no variety of size, and you have no variety of product, how well are you going to do? How successful are you going to be? You might sell 6 or 8 pints of honey at, $20 a pint, or a quart anymore? $10 a pint, $11 a pint? What are you selling it for? I don't know. But you're not going to make a survival, you're not going to have a surviving, successful business if you don't have some product variety. These are the 2 guys that help me. Keith helps me actually with the bees sometimes, and house sits when I'm in Texas or wherever. And Mark is also a great marketer of honey. He used to work for the Phillips Conoco company, so he's retired now and helps me out Saturday mornings. And we just have a blast. When you start thinking about putting your honey in stores, which like I said, we're in about 48 or 49 stores, you have to go through the process of checking with your local authorities as to what laws and regulations you will come under. In Kansas, it's very simple. I can sell honey to you and to anybody who comes to our farmer's market on Saturday morning, and I'm legal, because I'm dealing with that. It's a one-to-one basis. But when I sell my honey to a store, it all changes. And when I sell my honey, because I live in Kansas, if I sell my honey to a store in Oklahoma, which is a mile from me, which is one of my closest towns, now I'm not just subject to the state laws, but I'm subject to the FDA laws and FDA annual inspections. So make sure you find out, contact your local authorities and find out what you have to do. They're always very easy to work with the first time, okay? The first time you have a complaint or don't do anything, they come in and say, well, yeah, it could have been this, it could have been that. But if you have 2 or 3 or 4, then they start really getting nasty. So we have, fortunately, only had 1 complaint in maybe 14 years of retailing honey. A guy had a gallon of honey, and with your regular little honey bear lid, and he brought it to the health inspector and said there was ants all over the top of it. And it had been used down, maybe a third of it. But it was a complaint. I mean, we had to actually deal with this, and, we don't bottle our honey with ants in it. It's just not something we're going to do. And the health inspector knew that. So, I mean, he knew it was probably a bogus situation, and all I did was just flip the lid up a little bit. You know how honey bear lids do, you have to snap them. And I said, those are his ants, not ours. They didn't come from my honey house. We don't even have ants. I'm an ex-exterminator, okay? Anyways, I wanted to demonstrate, this is in a health food store, and with marketing your honey, it's all in the effect that you get. And light sometimes behind honey provides a remarkable effect. And this was a stand, we used to build a lot of them. We'd find these little 3-drawer dressers, at flea markets. Sometimes you can pick them up for $5, $7, $10. And we would remove the top, we would cut out a section in the top and put a plexiglass sheet in there with a neon light below it. And that shined light up through the honey here on this first shelf. And it just made for a beautiful effect. And that was one of our most successful health food stores that we had. I mean, they would just sell tons of honey for us in Coffeyville, Kansas. So think about that. Think about, how your labels are going to look. We actually are in the process of redoing our creamed honey labels. We have done as many as 20 different flavors and varieties of creamed honeys. We're going to talk a little bit about that again tomorrow too. But you have two of the best guys in the country right now making flavored creamed honeys, and in Clint and Blake. All I could think of was Brent, and I know him better than that. But sometimes I'm getting old-timers. Labeling is key and critical in giving all the information that you need to give to the consumer, and doing it in a little different way. I love Clint's new labels. You can see them out on his table. This is just another show we used to do with a lot of our creamed honeys displayed here and having multi-tiered shelves. But just have a variety when you are, and this is what we do. We used to do 20 to 25 shows a year. We're down to 3 now. So we retail very little of our honey, but those 3 shows are shows where we see 15 to 20,000 people. I mean, we don't go to a show anymore to see 800 people. The only place we go like that is our farmers market, where we maybe see 1,500 to 2,000 people. But I cut it off at 1,000. If we can't see 1,000 people, we're not going to do the amount we need to do to justify our time. So this is a feeder box. I just wanted to put this in here because what this is a false box. It has a bottom in it, and it has an entrance in the front. The bees can go from this unit up into this box and come out. It was a winter entrance and exit. And then it's a gallon jar in here inverted upside down over a screen that sits on the top of your upper hive body. And this was a super hive we had back 10, 15 years ago. Just a sign. We used to run a lot of 2-queen systems. We would make these up in the middle of April to reduce our swarming possibilities. And these 2-queen systems are very difficult to manage, especially if you're a new beekeeper, but they will triple your honey production. So if you're worried about the amount of honey you can produce, look into the 2-queen concept. I used to do the first time I ever spoke publicly at our Kansas honey producers meeting. I presented a program on 2-queen hives, and Dr. Shimanuki sat right on the front row. And so I was shaking the whole time I was doing it, because I was thinking, gosh, is everything I'm saying appropriate and right? And because here's one of the most, authoritative figures in the country right now working at Beltsville Bee Lab. And I'll also tell you, too, that the first time I went to a Kansas honey producers meeting in 1996, I looked at everybody there and I go, these people are really serious about bees. They had jackets on that said Kansas honey producers, and they had hats on, and I go, I'm just not at that level yet, and I turned around and walked out. So I learned a rule the next year: don't be intimidated by people who have expertise, because they're always willing to share it with you. And afterwards, the first person that came up and talked to me was Dr. Shimanuki and his wife. And he said, I never thought about I don't even remember what it was, but there was one thing in the talk he said, I never thought about it being that way. And it's true. Everybody, all of us can learn. I learn all the time more by doing these talks and going to different meetings around the country than I do just sitting at home in my own experience. That hive produced 250 pounds of honey, just shy of it, like 242 pounds of honey. Oh gosh, I'm getting close to my time. Our extracting facility, is basically a minimum operation for us. When we were running full board, 800 hives. Now it's a waste. I really need to sell some of this equipment because we're not extracting. I used to have 200 frame extractors, and now I probably only need one. There's actually another one sitting back behind this one. And, it's just not our focus. But this was a facility that we actually, there's the other one. And, you could extract 80 to 100,000 pounds of honey, which is what I had originally planned on doing and growing into. But something happened to our bees in around 2000, 2002, and 3 and 4, and they are just not as healthy or as capable of producing the amount of honey that they used to be. And I haven't found the management techniques that will get us back to those kind of levels that would justify the investment to go back to raising or keeping or maintaining 800 to 1,500 to 2,000 or 2,500 hive or colonies of bees. So really our extracting facility is way overbuilt for what we need. In the fall, I was a big believer in turning over our wax. And there was a real theory that, if you had 20-year-old frames and you had all those pupal cocoons still in that old black comb, that it wasn't healthy, that your bees were getting smaller and smaller and less productive. And in those old hives, they tend to have dormant issues that might not be present this year or for 4 or 5 years, but all of a sudden something happens and the bees are exposed to something, like maybe even a foul brood or chalk brood. So we wanted to turn our frames over every 5 years, and we've been doing that. So we were boiling out and rewiring, re-waxing those frames that needed it. And this was just basically an old hot water tank we put over a fire pit we had, and we could put about 20, 25 frames in there, and in 15 minutes they'd all be perfectly clean. You could we just cut out the major part of the comb, throw them in there, and it was fun. We used to do that, and have roast wieners and hamburgers in the pit, and baked potatoes, and cabbages. So anything you can throw in there is okay. It's not going to hurt. It's not the stuff coming off the frames won't. And of course, you're always building boxes and repairing boxes and painting boxes. And our year kind of wraps up after we get our bees to Texas now, the first week of December. And of course, then we're getting ready to go to our ABF annual conference, wherever it is, and get our honey entries ready for the honey show there, and maybe grab a week of vacation around Christmas. So in a very short, compact experience here that we've had this morning, I can only touch on maybe 1/10 of 1% of what we do. But I hope it's given you an idea or two. And we don't even hardly do this anymore, but we used to do it a lot in our area. It's totally inappropriate for Texas, but wrapping our hives would give us a couple of weeks jump in the spring in brood production. So again, it's all how you're going to do it yourself. Sometimes in the summer we get a chance to take a couple of days off after we've pulled our honey in August. This is always our month to fish for flatheads. And so when you're done with your work, take some breaks, enjoy the bees, enjoy whatever you can do. If you enjoy skiing, go skiing, do whatever you can do. And of course, when you're done with that, do some more. Anyways, again, always share some time each day with the bees and educate yourself. Read everything you can read if you want to be successful. I think Jerry would agree with this. If you're going to be a successful beekeeper and be here, when I come back in 5 years or 10 years, it's because you were here and you listened and you grabbed a little piece of information from this person and that and the next, and you put it all together and you make your experience. So make it a good one.
Thank you, Mr. Tucker. Wow, we have some speakers today, don't we? Yeah? Was that interesting?